Hello everyone, and thank you for coming back to the channel. Today's story moves into a powerful climax as the characters' fates begin to split in ways that can't be undone. After a fateful encounter on the narrow path, Diem finally found CEO Toan, only to helplessly watch him walk away confused and suffering from memory loss. She and her sister Toan tried to chase after him, but in the end, they lost him among the many twists and turns of destiny. Meanwhile, in a completely different turn of events, CEO Toan's mother, the woman behind countless dark schemes, can no longer stay on the run. International police have traced her movements and are quietly closing in, preparing to end a long calculated escape. On one side is Diem, heartbroken by a love she cannot hold on to. On another is CEO Toan, continuing a simple work in life in a pomelo orchard, unaware that his past is slowly catching up with him. And on the other side, the collapse of the mastermind who manipulated everything is drawing near. When the truth is finally revealed, will CEO Toan recover his memories? And will Diem have one more chance to see him again? Stay with us to follow what happens next. If you enjoy this emotional and suspenseful storyline, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you won't miss the upcoming episodes. Now let's begin the story. Early in the morning, a thin layer of mist still lingered on the grass along the roadside. The narrow path leading into the farm stretched and curved between two low banks of damp earth, still wet from the night's rain. Diem walked beside Toan, her older sister by a few years. They moved at an easy pace, shoulder to shoulder, the morning so quiet that the sound of the wind passing through the leaves was clearly audible. As they walked, Toan calmly went over the tasks for the day in her familiar steady voice. Diem listened, occasionally replying with a short answer. Everything felt ordinary until Diem suddenly slowed down. She stopped completely. Her eyes were fixed on a thick patch of grass by the side of the path, where a figure was huddled on the ground. It was a strange man. He was bent forward, both hands gripping his head tightly, his body shaking in short, uneven bursts. The way he looked made it clear he was in intense pain, unable to stand. "Sister Fan," Diem whispered, her voice dropping with worry. "Look over there." Toan stopped at once and followed her sister's gaze. When she saw what was in front of them, she frowned slightly. This road was usually deserted, and the sight of an unfamiliar man in that condition immediately put her on edge. The man suddenly let out a faint groan. It was weak, but filled with pain, echoing through the still air and sending a chill through both sisters. He shifted to one side, one hand clutching his hair, revealing a pale face beneath his tangled strands. "He looks like he's in a lot of pain," Diem said, her voice trembling. "I don't know what's wrong with him." Toan stayed silent, watching for a few more seconds. Her expression showed both concern and caution. She turned to Diem and clearly saw the confusion and compassion in her sister's eyes. "You stay here," Toan said slowly but firmly. "Let me go closer and check what's going on." Diem shook her head lightly. "Or maybe we should go together. What if he really needs help? I don't feel right just standing here." Toan looked at her for a moment, then let out a quiet sigh. She understood that Diem couldn't ignore someone in trouble, just like she couldn't. In the end, she nodded. "All right, but we stay alert. If anything feels off, we turn back immediately." The two sisters moved carefully toward the patch of grass. When they were only a few steps away, the stranger suddenly lifted his head. His eyes were unfocused and confused, as if he had just woken from a long nightmare. His gaze passed over to Toan, then stopped on Diem standing just behind her. The moment he noticed someone approaching the stranger, reacted instinctively. He pushed himself up from the ground, staggered to his feet, and began moving slowly toward the overgrown path. His steps were unsteady, but it was clear he was trying to get away from the two sisters. At that instant, Diem's heart seemed to stop. She froze, eyes wide, her whole body trembling. It was CEO Toan. There was no doubt about it. His face was worn, his clothes dirty, but his build, the way he moved, even the way he tilted his head in pain, everything was heartbreakingly familiar. Toan, the name burst from Diem's lips, her voice breaking in the morning air. The man paused for a split second, but he didn't turn around. Instead, he walked faster as if the name meant nothing to him at all. Toan, please wait. Without thinking, Diem ran after him. She rushed up from behind and wrapped her arms tightly around him, her shaking hands clinging to his thin back. Her body pressed against his, as if she were afraid that if she let go, he would disappear once again. CEO Toan jolted in shock. His entire body stiffened. His breathing turned sharp and uneven. "What? Who are you?" he cried out in panic, his voice unsteady. "Let go! Get away from me!" He struggled, trying to pull her arms off him. Inside his head was pure chaos, overlapping images, unfamiliar voices, his heart pounding as if it might burst. The girl holding him was crying uncontrollably, but to him, she was a complete stranger. "I'm Diem. It's me, Diem." She sobbed, holding on even tighter, her tears soaking through the back of his shirt. "Please don't go. Don't leave me again." But the fear inside CEO Toan only grew stronger. Gathering all his strength, he shoved her away. Diem stumbled and was forced to let go. Without hesitation, CEO Toan turned and ran. Diem screamed in despair. Both Diem and Toan chased after him at once. The two sisters ran as fast as they could along the uneven dirt path, their breaths ragged, their hearts pounding wildly. But CEO Toan was faster. He suddenly turned onto a narrow brush-filled shortcut and slipped behind a large bush. There he collapsed to the ground, clutching his head with both hands. Everything was spinning. His head throbbed as if it were being torn apart. Voices, broken images rushed in and vanished just as quickly. He couldn't remember anything, only the overwhelming fear and a terrifying sense of emptiness. Behind him, Diem and Toan were still trying to catch up. But Diem's foot suddenly slipped on a patch of wet grass. She fell hard onto the ground, pain shooting through her body, unable to get back up. Toan cried out in alarm. Toan ran a few more steps, but CEO Toan's figure had completely disappeared into the dense trees. With no other choice, she turned back and knelt beside her sister. Diem lay there, tears mixing with the morning dew, her empty gaze fixed on the direction he had run. She knew it. She had just found him again, and had lost him from her arms one more time. Toan went back to Diem and helped her sit up in the grass, still wet with morning dew. Both of them were breathing hard, their chests rising and falling, not just from exhaustion, but from the crushing disappointment. Diem tried to stand again, her eyes never leaving the path ahead, the place where CEO Toan had vanished behind the thick trees. "Diem, let's keep going a bit farther." Toan said, her voice low but steady, trying to stay calm. Maybe we can still catch up. Diem nodded. Even with the sharp pain in her leg, she clenched her teeth and moved forward. The two sisters followed the narrow path ahead, walking fast at first, then slowing as their breath ran out. The morning sun had risen higher, shining through the leaves and casting broken patches of light on the ground. But the familiar figure Diem was desperately hoping to see never appeared again. She stopped standing still in the empty path. Her eyes swept across the quiet surroundings, as if searching for even the smallest sign. But there was nothing left, only windgrass and a silence that pressed painfully on her chest. "He's gone," Diem whispered, her voice hoarse. They walked a little farther, but with every step, hope faded more and more. Finally, Toan took her sister's hand and gently shook her head. They both understood the chance they had just now was gone, and there was no way to find him again. Meanwhile, not far away, CEO Toan was still hiding behind the bushes. The panic slowly faded, replaced by a familiar sense of emptiness. He stood up and brushed the dirt off his clothes. In his mind, there was no image left of the two women from earlier. Only a vague worry about unfinished work. He continued walking toward the pomelo farm, the familiar route he took every day. When he arrived, he quietly blended back into the rhythm of daily labor. No one asked many questions, and no one mentioned what had happened that morning. He picked up the pruning shears and began harvesting pomelos, cutting down each round heavy fruit and placing it neatly into sacks. Sweat soaked through the back of his shirt. His hands moved quickly, automatically, as if his body remembered what his mind could not. The sacks slowly filled and were lifted onto the truck for the traders. Laughter, chatter, and the sound of engines starting pulled him fully back into a simple reality, one without memories, without a past. At the headquarters of the International Police, large screens continuously displayed footage from security cameras across multiple countries. One officer stopped in front of a short video clip, a middle-aged woman walking quickly. Her head slightly lowered, her movements tense. Zoom in on this frame. The image was enlarged. Even though her face was partially obscured, her build, her walking pattern, and the way she held her handbag close to her body matched perfectly with the data the police had previously collected. 87% match, a technician said quietly. "It's her." The information was transmitted immediately. A coordinated arrest plan was activated in silence. No sirens, no rushed movements. International police understood very well this woman was intelligent, cautious, and dangerous in her own way. CEO Toan's mother exited the airport area and got into a prearranged car. Through the window, the city slid past like something distant and unfamiliar. She looked outside, but her mind was elsewhere. Inside her head, fragments of memory began to surface. Images of CEO Toan as a child. The way he once looked at her with complete trust. And then, the way that look slowly changed. "I did everything for you," she whispered, as if trying to convince herself. "Without me, you would never have reached that position." But the more she thought about it, the faster her heart beat. A sense of unease crept in, as if someone were watching her every move. She glanced at the rearview mirror. The driver continued driving normally. The streets were crowded. Nothing seemed out of place. But her instincts had never been wrong. The street still held its false sense of calm, as if it had never known the chases, the secrets, or the crimes buried for so many years. Pale yellow streetlights spilled onto the damp pavement, stretching distorted shadows across the sidewalk. The night wind slipped through the gaps between buildings, carrying the cold metallic scent of a city that never sleeps. In hidden corners, closed cafes, darkened windows, international police quietly took their positions. No sirens, no badges, no signs that an arrest was about to happen. They blended into the night like shadows. One leaned casually against a public phone booth, fingers scrolling across a phone screen while his eyes stayed fixed on the end of the street. Another pretended to smoke beside a trash bin, every breath carefully controlled. From a second-floor balcony across the street, a silent pair of eyes watched, missing nothing. The target has entered the controlled area. The voice came softly through the earpiece, steady and emotionless. Maintain distance. Wait for the signal. At the end of the street, a black car slowly came to a stop. The engine shut off, leaving behind a brief heavy silence. The door opened. CEO Toan's mother stepped out her heels, touching the pavement lightly. She pulled a small suitcase behind her, its wheels clicking dryly against the sidewalk, one steady sound after another. In that moment, she didn't realize that even the smallest noise was being listened to. She looked up at the building in front of her. An unremarkable hotel, old signage, but lights still on just enough to feel safe. Just one night here. Just rest. Tomorrow she would move again. Another country. Another name. Another life. The thought eased the tightness in her chest, as if a weight she had carried for months had finally lifted. She had no idea that as she stood there, at least 7 pairs of eyes were locked onto her every movement. The street seemed to quietly close in around them, like an invisible trap. The city's sounds were still there, the distant traffic, the wind between buildings. But they faded into the background, giving way to this unavoidable moment. CEO Toan's mother stood still, her hand gripping the suitcase handle tightly. That hand had signed countless documents, made countless cold decisions. Now it trembled slightly. She didn't turn and run. She knew better than anyone running now would only make things worse. She looked at them one by one. 3 men stood slightly apart, forming a discreet but solid arc. A woman stood in front her gaze, sharp and calm. No one drew a weapon. No one raised their voice. That calm told her everything they had already won. "How long have you been following me?" she asked, her voice still carrying its familiar edge of sarcasm, as if this were nothing more than casual conversation. "Longer than you think," one of the male officers replied. "You're careful. But some traces can never be completely erased." She gave a small nod, a quiet acknowledgement that the game had reached its end. Memories flooded her mind. Rushed flights, hotels under different names, passports with different photos but the same eyes. She had lived for so long in a constant state of readiness to flee that she had forgotten what it felt like to stand still. "How do you want me to cooperate?" she asked. "First, please come with us," the woman said. "No handcuffs. You've been cooperative enough that they aren't necessary." It wasn't a compliment. It wasn't leniency. Just a statement of fact. And that was what made her let out a quiet laugh. "At least there's still some respect," she said. She pulled her suitcase forward and took a step, then stopped. "May I ask one question?" The woman nodded. "My son. Does he have anything to do with this?" The air tightened for a single breath, too brief for anyone else to notice, but long enough for her to know she had touched something important. "No," the woman replied firmly. "He is not under investigation." She closed her eyes for a brief moment. One slow, heavy breath. Throughout her life, she had sacrificed many things to protect her position. her power, and her family. But some sacrifices were never spoken aloud. Some choices, right or wrong, could never be undone. "That's good," she said as she opened her eyes. "I don't need anyone else to pay the price." They walked together down the street. No one touched her, but she knew she was under complete control. Street lights passed one by one over her graying hair. Each step echoed evenly, like the countdown of an invisible clock. As she walked, memories returned to earlier years when she was still a young woman full of ambition, convinced that intelligence and decisiveness could break any limit. When she believed rules could be bent if you were clever enough. When she thought she controlled everything. "Aren't you curious why we chose to arrest you here?" Another officer asked, his voice low, almost curious. She shook her head. "No need. If you chose this place, it means every other route was already blocked." "You're right." A car waited at the end of the street. No sirens, no flashing lights, just an ordinary vehicle easily lost among traffic if anyone happened to glance its way. The rear door opened. She placed the suitcase inside, then stepped in, sitting upright, hands resting on her knees. When the door closed, the outside world was cut off. The silence inside was so complete, she could hear her own heartbeat. The car started moving smoothly without hesitation. "Do you know what caused your plan to fail?" The woman sitting across from her asked. She thought for a moment. "A small mistake." "No," the woman replied. "A person." She frowned slightly. "There are people who refuse to stay silent," the woman continued. "And there are truths that no matter how deeply buried will always find their way back to the surface." She leaned back in her seat. A faint smile returned this time, mixed with exhaustion. "So in the end, I lost to the very thing I underestimated the most." Perhaps. The car turned onto another street. The city outside went on living, loud, indifferent, unaware. No one knew who the woman inside the car had once been, or what decisions she had made. And no one knew that at this very moment, a new chain of events had begun, not just for her, but for everyone she had once tried to protect. She looked out the window where the streetlights reflected her face, both familiar and strangely distant. For the first time in many years, she no longer had to think about the next destination. No more calculating escape routes. Only the truth remained. And she knew that from the moment the car began to move, her life had entered a new chapter. No more running. No more control, only facing what lay ahead. The handcuffs snapped shut with a sharp click. A small sound, but it echoed in her head like a final cut. Cold metal pressed against her skin, reminding her that everything was truly over. No more halls of power. No more backroom handshakes. No more last-minute phone calls that could turn the situation around. For the first time in many years, CEO Toan's mother felt that she no longer controlled anything at all. She stood still. No resistance. No questions. Her body felt hollow, leaving behind only a raw, deeply uncomfortable sensation. The very feeling she had avoided her entire life, being seen for who she truly was, without protection, without titles, without status. They led her down a narrow corridor. Cold white fluorescent lights reflected off the floor and onto her worn shoes. Each step echoed evenly, heavy and deliberate. Only then did she realize she could no longer hear the suitcase rolling behind her. The suitcase, the symbol of constant escape, had been taken from her without her noticing. No one spoke. This silence was nothing like the calculated pauses she once used to pressure her opponents. This was the silence of an ending, of having no choices left. She was brought into a small room. Gray walls, a metal table, 2 chairs facing each other. No window, no clock. Nothing to anchor her to time or space. When the door closed behind her, she shivered slightly, not from the temperature, but from the clear awareness that from this moment on, she was no longer the one controlling the game. She sat down. The handcuffs weighed heavily on her wrists, but the heavier weight pressed inside her chest. A feeling both familiar and foreign regret. Not loud, not dramatic, just quietly spreading like water soaking into dry ground, impossible to stop. In that moment, the image of CEO Toan appeared in her mind, not in a tailored suit, not on the covers of business magazines, not in boardrooms where she once stood behind him pulling the strings. The image was of a young boy standing silently in the living room long ago, gripping his school bag eyes waiting for praise, or simply a glance of care. But she hadn't looked. She had always believed she was preparing a solid future for her son. She believed power was protection. Money was security. Control was the only way to safeguard what she loved. And in doing so, she had turned her own child into part of a calculated system. Nothing more, nothing less. A chess piece. She closed her eyes. Her breathing slowed, heavy and strained. "He won't forgive me," she murmured, her voice so soft it nearly dissolved into the air. The words fell onto the floor of the room unanswered. No argument, no comfort. The silence wasn't cruel. It was simply honest. She suddenly understood a bitter truth. For years, she had believed she was sacrificing everything for her son. But she had never once asked whether he needed that sacrifice. Never once allowed him to choose his own path, free from her enormous shadow. She opened her eyes. The wall in front of her was blank. No pictures, no marks. Like a clean sheet exposing everything. And in that moment, she realized what she had truly lost wasn't money, power, or freedom. It was the one relationship she could never buy back, manipulate, or force. The door opened. 2 people entered. A file was placed on the table. Documents were opened. Questions began, steady, precise, emotionless. She answered, slowly at first, then more smoothly. Not because she wanted to cooperate, but because she was tired of hiding. Each answer felt like a piece of the past dragged into the light. Each detail recalled like a small blade, never fatal, but painfully clear. At one point she stopped. "Do you have children?" she asked suddenly. The person across from her looked up briefly, surprised, then replied simply, "Yes." She nodded as if she had expected it. "Then you'll understand. Some mistakes don't begin with cruelty. They begin with fear." No one responded. But this time, the silence wasn't entirely empty. When the interrogation paused, she was let out. The handcuffs were still there. She walked more slowly now, her back slightly bent, not from age, but because for the first time she was no longer forcing herself to stand tall. Somewhere out there, CEO Toan was still living his life, no longer under her control, no longer pulled backward by the schemes she once called for his own good. And that, painful as it was the most correct thing she had ever allowed to happen. The door closed again. In the quiet space, CEO Toan's mother sat down, hands resting on her knees, eyes fixed straight ahead. No more running, no more calculating. Just a woman facing the consequences of a lifetime of choices. This time no one answered, and she knew that this silence would stay with her for a long time, like a sentence that needed no words. Information about the discovery and impending arrest of CEO Toan's mother was quickly transmitted back home through secure professional channels. Dry data lines and impersonal codes carried the weight of an entire chain of events spanning many years. At police headquarters, the atmosphere shifted immediately. Investigators were urgently summoned. The case files were reopened and laid neatly across the long table in a secure meeting room. Each document, each photograph, each audio recording and written statement was reviewed again carefully, precisely leaving no detail unchecked. This was no longer a phase of searching or speculation. This was the moment when the truth had to be placed on the table. Names that once appeared scattered across files were now connected into a complete chain. Past decisions, shady transactions, seemingly legal interventions all gradually revealed their true nature. The case was no longer about one individual, but a broader picture of power manipulation and the cost of believing oneself above the law. In one corner of the room, a young investigator stood silently staring at the analysis board. Red arrows crisscrossed, linking events together, converging on a single point. He exhaled softly. At last, everything fit. "Prepare for the final phase," the team leader said, his voice low but firm. "When the subject is extradited, we must be ready." No one replied, but everyone understood. They had gone too far to stop now. And they knew this case's ending wouldn't simply close a file, it would send unavoidable shockwaves. Elsewhere, far from that sealed meeting room, CEO Toan still knew nothing. But the links were tightening. The past he never chose. The secrets he was never allowed to know were rising to the surface. There was no longer any way to avoid them. No gray area left to hide in. Everything was moving closer to the end, not with gunfire, not with breathless chases, but with the heavy silence of truth, slow, inevitable, and always on time. And when the final door of the case closes, the biggest question will no longer be who was right or wrong, but who will have to face the consequences of choices made long ago. The video ends there, but the story may not be over.